What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly. And this week we are going back to the desert island. We're going to be talking comics at Desert Island Comics. And I'm joined by a good friend of the show and an alum of the Comics in Motion network, Tony Farina. How are you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm very well, Scott. Thanks for having me. I'm excited. I love the 20th Century Geek show. As you know, I've been a fan. Before we even met, I was a fan. I was a supporter of you back in the day.
Yeah, greatly appreciate the support.
I love it. I love the show. It's one of my favorite shows. And so I'm thrilled. I'm honored to be a guest on here. The Desert Island Comics is a great one. There's a BBC show, right? Desert Island Discs?
Yes.
I love that show because it's like this. It's the same thing where you can't pick the whole album. You have to pick the song. And so you do the same thing here where it's like really hard because, we cheat a little with one of my choices, but because it's a bigger issue. So to try to pick like one floppy, 30-page comic was really hard. So I appreciated the mental gymnastics you made me go through.
Yeah, the challenge. I have to admit, comics and albums is different because I say the sort of like the premium editions they do, like one of the one that your choice and things like The Killing Joke, and you sort of go, oh, okay, I can let that one go because it's sort of it's less than 100 pages. It's right, it was sold as an issue, that sort of, so you can get around that sort of thing.
But with the records, with the single songs, it's always crazy to listen to that. It's like, how do you pick one song off that album, where so this is fun. I'm super excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. So, before we even start, because obviously we're going to go through this, we'll go through them one at a time. We'll go through them in chronological order. So we will go back to the earliest issue and then we'll move through. But first, let's just sort of give the audience a bit of a sort of an insight. So what are the 3 issues that we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, well, the one that I cheated on was X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills, which I've actually discussed on a different show with a different angle with Max, on Max's show. But it is hands down my favorite Marvel comic of all time. It's not even my favorite X-Men team. That's the craziest thing. But it is my favorite Marvel comics, my favorite X-Men comics. So that is number 1. And these are all old, everybody. I'm old, so nothing from this century. And then we'll cover Batman 442, which is the first appearance of Tim Drake as Robin, not first appearance of Tim Drake. And I was torn on that, but really the first appearance of Tim Drake, you don't see him. If he's a point of view character, like he's even though his Robin costume, and I know we'll talk about that, is exactly the same as Jason and Dick's at first. Tim Drake has always been my favorite Robin, and this is why. And then the third one, and this was tough, is going to be Death, the High Cost of Living, number 1 of her miniseries from '93. And I almost picked The Sound of Her Wings, which is Sandman number 8.
Yes.
But the reason I didn't is because I wanted, this is the first time Death really shines on her own. While The Sound of Her Wings is her story, she's there to kind of cheer up Morpheus after his grumpy time. Grumpy, being trapped in a basement for 75 years will make anyone grumpy. But so he has every right. But I felt like having her interact with humans, and so those were my 3 picks. But it was tough, and I almost picked Green Lantern, Green Arrow '87, the first appearance of John Stewart. But again, it was like that one felt like cheating because that was at the time, and you had just done the 30-minute thoughts on the beginning of the Hard Traveling Heroes, which was when those books then had like 2 or 3 stories in them. So '87, the John Stewart was like 15 pages, and then there was an Ollie story, and then there was a Canary story. So it was like you're really getting 3 stories for one, so it felt a little cheaty. And I almost picked, again, Jon Stewart's Mosaic #1, because that was, to me, still the greatest maxi series maybe ever.
Well, one of the things I find interesting about all these books, but also sort of, you see about the hard traveling heroes, especially sort of issue 87 where they've got the 3 different stories.
Yeah.
One of the things I find most interesting is this sort of, you've got these old comics. They're not old. We're old.
We're old.
They're still classic, is what they are. They're
classic. That's what
comics.
You meant, right? Yeah.
Is the fact that story of Jon Stewart being introduced as Green Lantern is told, like I say, over 15 pages.
Yeah.
And it's quite a dense story.
Oh, it's a kick in the pants. Yeah.
It's not like today. That would have been told over 6 issues now.
Right. Yeah.
And in that, they do not mess about. Like, there's this whole thing of sort of like, yeah, this is where we're going to go with this. It's going to hit you in the nuts. It's going to get to you. And then at the end of it, we're going to establish that he's now the backup Green Lantern.
Yeah.
And these sort of have the same thing. Like, especially, we'll get into God Loves in a minute, but every single one, at least this and the Batman, like they're not so much dialogue heavy, but they are story heavy. And there's a lot of sort of like ideas in there, and they just sort of come at you like one at a time at times. It's like, all right, wow.
Yeah.
This would be really stretched out these days.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. All 3 of these books that I picked, because I do the indie comic show, and so there was a few indie comics that I bandied about, but again, I feel like there's really only a handful of like one issue of a modern indie comic that works in this way. That what I like about these 3 stories is that while they're superhero stories, like you said, they're not real. Well, Death isn't, but they're not superhero heavy. They're story heavy. They're character. These are all character stories. And the reason I love indie comics is while there's a plot, they're generally very character heavy.
Yes.
It's like my very first episode was I Kill Giants, which is I almost did I Kill Giants 6 when Maddie fights the monster, the big one, the Titan. I was like, because honestly, when the first time you see Maddie with the hammer in that, I was like, oh. But I didn't, because I felt like I wanted to highlight some of these superhero or like traditional comics that are influential to some of these other indie comics, and just a different way of comic storytelling than the way and it's not that I don't like modern stuff. I read obviously plenty of modern current DC and Marvel comics, but I feel like these stories, again, classics, we're going to say, Scott, I appreciate you saying that. Like you said, just the storytelling is different. And I felt like if I'm stuck with just these 3, I'd rather have something that gives me a lot to chew on, and I could come back to again and look in the background and see what's happening. Because these are the only 3 comics I'm going to have on my island. Yeah,
that's it. That's the rule. Well, let's start then. Let's get into to God Loves, Man Kills. So it's 1982, I believe. And it's to sort of boil it down. It's basically it tries to boil down the essence of what is the story of the X-Men. It's that thing about being an outsider, being chosen as the pariah. You are the scapegoat. It takes that and then just basically smashes it across history and sort of says, well, and it's incredibly relevant today, really. But the story sort of pulls out and says, yes, we represent every sort of outsider there's ever been. We represent the Jews in Nazi Germany. We represent, black minorities in sort of lots of Western culture. We represent LGBTQ communities. And then, then you basically held up this person in the villain as sort of like, just almost like ultra right-wing conservative, sort of like, no, you are the scapegoat, you are the villain, you are the baddie. And you read through it and you're just like, oof, like everything we're talking about today was still raw and an issue in 1982.
Yeah.
So where did you come across this first? I mean,
Yeah, I was only 9 when it came out, so I don't remember reading it. I think in 86 it was reprinted, and I think that's how I got it. I feel like after I should have talked to my cousin about it because I was the DC kid in our life, and he was the Marvel. So we would, influence each other that way, and that was how I kind of got into X-Men, was through him. But I feel like that was it, and I think it was reprinted in '86 because the original cover and the cover I had were different. So I think I got that '86 reprint and probably just picked it up at I don't know, we like, I had a comic shop which was a few towns over from where I grew up, but a lot of times it would just be like going to, believe it or not, like just like junk shops, like flea markets and stuff, and just my parents would go on the weekends every once in a while. And so I had money. I worked on my grandparents' farm. I didn't get paid. My grandparents didn't pay me, but my parents would occasionally be like, all right, here's some money because you've been working for free your whole life. And so I'd have some of my own money. And then as I got older, like 14, 15, 16, then I had jobs, so you could buy stuff. So I'm sure I just came across it that way and was like, this looks awesome. Didn't really know, other than it was a standalone X-Men book, I didn't have to do any more than buy this one. And that was enticing to me. So I'd say that was, I was probably like 13. Yeah, boy, so kicked me in the ass.
Yeah, well, as a 13-year-old coming into this, you're thinking, oh, wicked, X-Men.
Yeah.
I'm going to get to see them sort of fighting Sentinels or going up against Magneto or whatever. And then the first 2 pages of this book, I forgot. I hadn't read it in a while, and I knew it happens. I'd just forgotten how brutal the first 2 pages of this book are. Like, you literally see 2. It makes it explicit. 2 young kids, and it's also 2 young black kids,
right?
Hunted. Their parents have been killed, and they are being hunted to the school playground, and they are executed, and their bodies strung up as a warning
on the swing set too.
On the swing set,
with the idea that children would be the first one to find them, not adults. It's terrifying.
I'd forgotten that. I knew this happened, but it can't be that brutal. Oh my God!
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised. I mean, the comic book code was falling away, but was still in place.
In '82, it was definitely still. I mean, and we'll talk about this in the next one too. But this was pretty tame era. Yeah, I don't know how we got away with it. I don't know if it's because it was. The Baxter paper, which is what thick. It was a glossy. Maybe it was sold in bookstores. I don't know how they got around it.
There must be a loop. I mean, it's not even. It's not. I mean, it's not explicit. I mean, I will say it's not gratuitous in that you see them being executed, but it's obvious. It's context. But
and then Magneto finds them, and he sees them there. So it's not like you don't see the killing,
but you see the bodies.
Yeah. Ugh.
Yeah, and it's quite. I mean, one of the things is, I mean, I've got it here in front of me, but it's one of the things as well. The one thing I was quite surprised about is coming from America in particular, which is is clearly a very sort of Christian-based country, and in all its different rainbow of varieties, but literally. You don't know who's hunting down these mutant kids to begin with. But then straight away, you're sort of like, oh, you do get sort of an explicit mention. And it's sort of one of the first things is you have someone referencing the Bible.
Yes.
I've even got his flaming name now.
Stryker.
The Stryker coming out and basically being this evangelical and sort of quoting the Bible straight away. It's sort of like this equivocation of God's word, which is what it's called, God loves, man kills. But this thing of like God's purity and mutants being the enemy is from the off, and it's just sort of, I was like, it's still shocking today.
Well, and it's but it's still accurate today. It's shocking because it should be shocking, but it still happens because it does. We're recording this still. In the midst, it's July, and we're still in the coronavirus is happening. And there are still people who say out loud, I don't have to worry because God won't let me die. That's absurd.
I literally saw, there was a video, it was several weeks ago now, but there's a video of when they first opened up the churches, and there were people going back, and there were people interviewing and saying, are you concerned? you're worried you're going to be congregated in a confined area, and a woman leans out of a car and gets really aggro with the reporter and says, "I'm not worried because I am," which I think her words were, "because I am covered in the blood of Jesus." And you just sort of like, oh, all right.
Okay. Yep.
There's no convincing.
You can't come back from that. Yeah, right. And that's why I think Stryker, and this version of Stryker, instead of like the movie version of Stryker, this version of Stryker is far more terrifying than random general, colonel, captain, whichever version of Stryker it is, depending on the X-Men movie you're in, who's just kind of a dick. This one is a sociopath and has a plan. Like, he is evil as opposed to like he's kind of a dick. And I think this is the best. And I'm not praising him. This is the best version of Stryker because I feel like what you just said. If you can't get someone to move off of their position, like they're that close-minded, that makes them more dangerous. Yeah.
I mean, one of the weird things in this book is that you get his backstory.
You do.
You get sort of Stryker's backstory, like what brought him to that point. And there's several questions I have around that, because it sort of seems like he gets caught in a nuclear explosion. Yeah. Which is obviously, the X-Men, child of the atom and all that sort of stuff. Get that. Firstly, like, what's he doing near a test site? I know he's meant to be a soldier, but that's still, more common sense. With a pregnant wife. But then when she gives birth to something that's clearly, you never see it, but clearly is alluded to being deformed in some way. And so he murders it. And then when his wife comes round from the pregnancy, from the birth, kills her.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh, right, well, I didn't want her to see this, and I didn't want to have to deal with it, so I killed her. And it tries to give him this. At no point did it try to make him sympathetic. I mean, let's be clear. They're not trying to give him a sympathetic, because you see this origin story and you're still like, no, you were unhinged when that happened. Like,
right.
This hasn't turned you. You were clearly crazy to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's like the idea that by killing her, it also is killing any. There's no proof that it happened, right? We see it, but other people don't. And also, it's like he doesn't want to admit that he could possibly be the reason for this. Like the Jean he just blames her. It must be her. I'm her. So if I kill the baby and I kill her, it's all her fault. She had it coming because she was a mutant, maybe. And so he's a monster. And any good villain who doesn't who is that convicted is worth having, because it's his resolution and his, like you said, there's no sympathy there. And, there's lots of times when you can read about a villain. I mean, for years, people have tried to make Joker sympathetic, and he's not. He's never, I'm a Batman fan all the way back, and the Joker is evil. I never like him. I'm never on Team Joker. He's a monster. And that's plain and simple. Sure, terrible things may have happened to him, and that maybe it's not his fault but he does awful things all the time. He abused Harley for years. He's a monster. Stryker in this is a monster, and I love that because it sets up the conversation that Charles and Magneto are always having, which is the Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X. Do we do violence? Are we passive? There's a villain that's so bad that makes them temporarily be willing to like come together. Like, who's worse than Magneto? Who's worse than, because like Magneto's not a villain that I ever hate. Like, you're always like, I see where it's coming from. So I just think that's what makes this so good is this was the first time this book helped me see the gray in Magneto in a way that until this time, and now as an adult, of course, I see it, but until this time, as a kid, Magneto was the villain, always. Yeah. And he isn't, in this, he's not.
Well, one of the things we'll get to the conversation, because there's a great conversation at the end, and I love the fact that Scott Summers, Cyclops, steps in, and he's the one that, like, no, you set us up to follow this dream. You've got to stick to it. What I like is right at the start of the book, though, there's another piece where Stryker is on TV with Charles Xavier.
Yeah.
They're making a TV, and it comes back to this thing about the power of the media and presentation. One of the key things they have in this is at the end of this thing is Stryker sort of runs rings around Xavier.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because Xavier's like, well, no, the genetics of this and da da da, and you can tell Stryker's like, the people don't care. No one cares about that. But what they do care about is there are people out there, or there are beings out there with these powers that they could do this. They could come into your home, and it makes me think. They did it in the first X-Men movie. They moved that dialogue to Senator Kelly.
Yeah.
And it becomes that thing of like, well, I've got this list here, and there's ones here that could just work into Fort Knox. There's ones here that could do, you know, they can harness magnetism, electricity, you know. And it's that thing of fear, isn't it? And it almost feels like, weirdly, like a Fox News talking heads, isn't it? Where
This is like somebody read this and was like, yep, we could do this. We could make this show happen.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's so good. I mean, I'm just looking at the dialogue. It's sort of, they even acknowledge that you know, maybe Charles Xavier doesn't look the right way to have gone on screen. He looks quite grim and, you know, stern, and so they're like, well, maybe they should have sent somebody else on. And I love the fact that they're acknowledging this. That, we, as people, we're a bit stupid, and we'll buy into pretty much anything if we're told to.
Yeah.
And that's
it's still the way. It's still the way. I mean, every day, my dumb president says something terrible that's just a bold-faced lie, and people are like, "Yep, it's." And then what happens is, and this is what is so genius about what Claremont does here. First of all, the show that they're on is a real show in America. That's a real. That Nightline's real. Like, that's a real thing. So he used actual names of actual things. So he made it. He grounded it in the Marvel way. Marvel's always grounded in a real place, which is great. And all three of these books that we're doing are in real, like the real world exists. So I find that fascinating. But what he does is it's the news site. So Stryker says what he says now on a news program, which is really just a debate show, Nightline. And then at the time, now it's really just more like, you know, like long form kind of news. But so then the next morning, the morning news reports on what happened. Now it's become news. And so now he can then say, well, the news reports say, and that's what the dumb president that I have does. And all politicians do, but this dumb president, this is the one thing that he's a genius with, is manipulating the masses. And it's the same thing. It's like, well, somebody's reporting on it. Well, they're reporting on it because you said it.
Yes.
You made up a lie, it's reported on, and now you can pretend it's a fact. And that's what Stryker does. And it is so amazing that this was 1982. It's 2020. The same shit's happening. We, as you said, we're willing to. We have not gotten smarter. We'll just say that.
No, I mean, this is what, 2 years into Reagan. So
2 years into Reagan. Yeah. When did Thatcher? When was she there? Right.
79. So she's 3 years. Yeah, we're 3 years into Thatcher.
Yeah.
2 years into Reagan. It's the same thing.
I know.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
But the one thing I find interesting about this as well is, like you say, you have your sort of top tier villains in this. You've got Stryker, and then below him, he's got what he refers to as his purifiers. They're like his army, his elite squad. And then beyond that, though, what I like about this is, again, it doesn't just have them as some sort of detached entity. You know, like sometimes you have like Magneto and the Brotherhood of Evil and all this other stuff. Right?
The Marauders. Do you remember them? I loved the Marauders. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Hey, with the Marauders, we kill mutants. Like, that was their tagline. I was like, what the. I love that. Yeah.
But those sort of groups are sort of like elite, separate. So you can sort of, you know, so you go, okay, yeah, they're the baddies, that sort of thing. But there's a scene in this, again, at the beginning, where Kitty Pryde, who becomes central to the story, is confronted by some idiot kid at her, I don't know if it was
her dance
class. And he calls her out, and he's just a teenager, and he is regurgitating the stuff from Stryker, and it's that thing of like, you can tell, like, yeah, this is getting into the populace. This is becoming popular opinion. I mean, it's again, some of the language in here I'm not sure you'd get away with today, because she then confronts her black teacher and sort of says, you know, I'm not going to use the wording.
No. Yeah.
But like she confronts her and says, them calling me Mutie is no different to me calling you the N-word. And to be fair, the teacher's like, I think Peter says to her, I'm really sorry she said that. And the teacher's like, no, but she's right.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different.
Yeah.
And it does. It's that chord that they're trying to set this up of like, again, this is permeated. It's just the same as racism. It's just the same as segregation. It's all that. And so for it to happen, it's really interesting.
It is. And you know, it's what I noticed last time I read it. If you look real close in that scene, and this is not discussed really anywhere else in the X universe, Kitty is wearing a Star of David.
Yes.
It's like Kitty's Jewish, and I had no idea. You know, like Kurt wears his faith on his sleeve, right? Kurt,
yes.
You know, we all know he would have been a priest if he weren't born Nightcrawler. We all understand that. And, you know, Peter, his faith comes out, and it's like, you know, Logan, of course, he doesn't want to talk about it or doesn't remember whatever. But like Kitty's just always been like this kid. And so you never really thought about it. And in this, it's like front and center. If you look, it's there. It's not like there's no other talk in the entire book that Kitty's Jewish, but there it is. And it was like, oh man, what a kick. And I don't really remember that in the rest of the X universe, but just a subtle way to set that up to again.
Her faith is one of those things that is never hugely acknowledged, which is fine because it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
It's not her defining factor. But they have wheeled it out for stories before and used it quite well. And in this, I think because you know Magneto's story, because it was Claremont. I didn't realise this, that Claremont was the one that gave Magneto his Jewish
Claremont's
concentration camp.
Yeah, before then, it was just a generic, literally helmet-wearing baddie that... Yeah. Stan Lee wasn't... I mean, he's the master, of course, but he wasn't that deep.
No. But in this, I like the fact that there's sort of like an acknowledgement of, if you can see it in her faith is there, it does parallel her to Magneto.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. It was so cool to see that, and they never caught this when I read it, you know, a while ago, like maybe a year ago when I did it. That was the first time I noticed, and I was like, oh, I mean, and maybe when I was 13, I caught that or I knew, but it was like, oh man, it's just right there, and it's just such great storytelling because Claremont, who loves words, this is the one time where he let Anderson do the talking, where he was like, I'm just going to have you stick that in there, and if people catch it, great. We don't have to talk about it.
Well, one of the things I would say is that, because we've talked all the positives of this, and there are some, it is amazing things, and there is a lot to laud, and we'll get to sort of the finale in a minute and stuff. But there's one part in this book which I find is an odd, I don't know. It's almost like they've got to have action because it's obviously it's an X book, so you know they want to have all those sorts of factors. And there's a moment where Kitty Pryde is being chased down by the bunch of purifiers, and she comes across basically a gang out of the Warriors.
No, for sure. I know you can always hear Warriors. I know.
yeah. Come out and play. It feels very like that, but for all the good that it's done in this idea, you then get this gang that basically declares that they're going to rape her in not some, they don't say outright, but that's clearly what they're indicating. And they are made up of, you know, sort of Hispanics, blacks, as an Indian, and it's sort of like all of a sudden you're like, all the good you've done, you sort of, you're sort of treading a fine line here, Claremont.
Yeah, I know. I find that whole because there's some other good action scenes. There's like Peter has to stop a car, and there's a couple even they just randomly throw in some battle room scenes just so that they do something. Because you're right, this is a sit around and talk. We haven't really even talked about the X-Men, which is why this is one of my favorite books, because the X-Men are there, but it's not really about them. You know, it's about their existence as opposed to them like being badasses. But you're right, that moment is it I guess you can look at it too, it's a product of its time. While you're trying, like every time somebody breaks down a barrier and does something positive, there's still always something that person can learn. And this, like, Storm's not in this, right?
She is, but her and Scott get sidelined
Right.
Really right until the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you take the really only, black kid, she's an African princess character, and you remove her from it. So, and I've always felt like, while Claremont invented Storm and he invented Forge, who's Native American, but he didn't do race very well. Like, for a book that's about race, you still put two white guys at the front of it. So it's whether that's a commentary. This is the question, and I'm glad you brought this up, because Hamilton just released on Disney Plus, so we saw it in the theater back in January, like with a touring cast, but to watch the original cast. And so there's this conversation happening now. It's like, well, my problem with Hamilton is they don't directly confront slavery in it, and I'm like, the cast of Hamilton is what's confronting slavery. Like, what are you talking about? Daveed Diggs is playing Jefferson. I don't know what more you can say. The fact that it's a cast of minority actors playing slave owners, that's the commentary. Like, we don't need to now do a Chris Claremont word bubble to say, audience, there's a commentary on slavery. It's weird that people of color who would have been owned, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's pretty obvious. So I don't know that Claremont is doing that by suddenly having this ethnic minority gang out of the Warriors. I think that's great. Be that, I don't know if, like, he's showing us something and it's supposed to be.
I don't think it is. It feels a bit like it's an action scene. They've grounded this in New York and the real world. They wanted something to feel gritty. I think that's what it feels like to me.
Okay, yeah, it's probably right. I'm sure that you're right. It's just like, I was trying to say, there could be that argument that he was being super meta. Probably not, but that's one way to look at it.
It just maybe doesn't translate. Maybe that's the one part of the book that hasn't aged particularly well.
Well, and the fact that Kitty said that, what we talked about earlier, the fact that he says that didn't age well. Like you said, there's a 0% chance that's happening now.
Well, one of the things you say about the race as well, which I find it's interesting, is you say about the team, but the team that ends up sort of going up against Stryker without sort of Scott and Aurora are quite different. You've got you end up with you've got a Russian, you've got a German, you've got a Canadian, and then you've got a young American Jewish girl and stuff. So you have quite a dynamic team. However, it's never that bit, like you say, isn't really gotten into.
Yeah.
And it's, so that's sort of almost, I feel sometimes like a missed opportunity.
I do too. And we don't know what the editor, I don't remember who the editor of this, I don't know how much Chris got edited. I think at the height of his powers, they kind of left him alone. I
was going to say, the amount of dialogue that's in here, I don't think there was a great deal of editing.
That's true. Again, if I'm on my island, I love words. I need to be able
yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But he, so, right. I feel like this is one of those things where he's like, I'm fucking Chris Claremont. You're not going to tell me what to do. And if I'm going to sideline the two leaders of the X-Men, that's what I'm going to do. And maybe it was, and again, could it be because I was always on Team Storm, during that battle, I was always Team Storm. I think it was X-Men 201. I almost picked that one. It was like, who will lead them? Do you remember? And it was like, they were fighting in that book is so good. And I'm always was Team Storm. She was always my, I'm like, I don't like Scott. I mean, he's fine, but if they need to have a leader, it needs to be Storm because she's the smartest of the two of them. She can handle it. She doesn't get overly emotional, which is the best part about her, right? She can get pissed, but in general, like, she doesn't get mad at the team. So
no, she is a really calming influence on the team, isn't she? She's got the wise. She's the wise one. She's always back and she's like,
it's wisdom, right?
This is the way it should be. I know that you want to do that, but this is the way we've got to do it. And Scott's the one that's like, blast things.
Yeah, right. Literally, right. Anger from his eyes. So I feel like maybe Claremont removed the two of them from it, so that wasn't the conversation.
Yeah.
Of, well, who's going to be in charge? Well, if neither of them are there, then they're.
Yeah, I like that it does. It's because it's almost like an inexperienced team, and they acknowledge that. That's the other thing I like about the Danger Room scene, is that it acknowledges that they're not a hugely cohesive team. They have to think about things. It's not normal, so they are going up against an elite military force at one point, and they're not a set up team. So it does add that dynamic that they're quite young. Let's get to the end though, because I think because the end, I think the climax of this really introduces several really interesting elements. So it is replicated in some of the films, but Stryker holds a rally,
of course,
at Madison Square Garden, and whilst there, he's also created a technology utilizing the telepathic capabilities of Charles Xavier to basically target and find people with the mutant gene, and basically some sort of disruptor, sort of gives them a really bad headache, they're bleeding from their eyes and nose and ears and stuff. And at the same time, he's given this almost like a sermon of evil about why mutants are evil and sort of stuff. And so you've got all the action in the background of the X-Men trying to get there to sort of stop him and save Charles Xavier. But then you've also got, throughout it, you see him giving this sermon and then little pockets in the audience of people's reaction of whether or not they're for or against. And it's just so well done.
Oh.
What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think it's really prescient, and it was, the mega church evangelical thing has never really gone away. Television is what made it happen. It's what keeps it going. Now it's the internet and Twitter and whatever. So I loved it. I loved, again, this is such a human story in the middle of an X-Men story, which is, again, the commentary. It's like, well, they're just folks too. They just happen to be born with a healing factor or blue. It's not, they didn't, Kurt didn't choose to, Kurt would be a priest. That was Kurt's. Kurt would rather not be this. This is his life, so he just has to live it. And so I think seeing the way that the human reaction there during the big rally is important, because you end up understanding how there are still going to be some people who get stuck up with the madness of the mob, and some people who will sit back. And of course, we always know those people who are willing to take a step back and go, whoa, this is too much. They're the minority.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I find interesting in this is you get glimpses, and there is, you get the mob. Even within the mob, there's a couple of people, you get there's a moment when Magneto is struck down and he's weak, and the mob's about to attack him and all this other stuff. And a couple of things that, like you say, haven't aged well. But the mob are very much like baying for blood, like literally, like, they are saying they're going to do whatever to him. And it is like a mob. They've literally depicted them to be like hysterical. It's that hysteria.
Yeah. And
you have watching on some senior politicians, and it's sort of they're saying, there's someone sort of saying, they're going to kill him. This is insane. And Stryker's gone too far. And it's almost they're depicting that, well, don't worry, the people in power can see that this is wrong. This politician is seeing that this is wrong, and he's going to do something about it. And then also you have the police. Like, there's several members of the police that are sort of like guarding the audience. And we'll get to the very, very climax. But there's the police sort of protecting Magneto and saying, like, no, you can't. We know what he's done, sort of thing, but you can't kill him. And to me, I don't know, it feels unusual. I mean, this is 1982, it's from, I say, but I wouldn't see that they would depict, police, I think, rocky, especially at the moment, but politicians being on the side of right. But this sort of says, well, the mob is wrong, but people in authority are going to be fair-minded and, on the side of right. And we know that's not really the case.
Yeah, I feel like it was, again, because this is such a human book, even though it's about mutants, it's a human book. So I always felt the police officers making those choices, hard choices, were showing, they're the heroes in this scenario.
Yeah.
Like, being smart, like, they don't get caught up with the mob. And so I feel like that was, that's the commentary there, is that a few people, now granted they're people in authority with weapons, but a few people could stand up to a mob. I think like that was what I've always felt about that. I would have preferred it to have been just as a callback, and again, who am I to question the master, but a callback to the opening horrific scene. I would have preferred to have seen Magneto saved by human children.
Yes. Oh, that would be amazing.
I would have preferred that. And I know that's, I think it would have made the point a little bit more. But I get what because it's right. The comment that Claremont is making, you could really read it as propaganda. He's like, don't worry, you can have faith in your leaders.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. If the mob if the mob was almost like self-policed by some teenagers or something, that would almost be a more powerful statement of like the future generations. Because I mean, Stryker's an old man, but he's a man in middle age. It would have been nicer to see, maybe, as you're right, say that, look, yeah, he represents the past and bigotry from the past. These are the kids for the future, and they represent fair-minded, and they're going to be more open and that sort of thing. I think that's how it would probably be written today, if you were to. Yeah,
because Peter's sister is there. I mean, you have a human in the cast, so it would have been an easy and Kitty's dance teacher. I mean, granted, she's an adult, but you have human characters that you've put in the book, so it would have made sense for them to have been involved in some way later. So I just think that would have been more powerful, is to have children saved. But
no, that would have been a great moment. And of course,
Indy was saved by a bunch of children once too. So maybe they were like, "Look, we don't want to steal that." I don't remember.
We've been there.
Yeah, we've done it already.
Yeah. And of course, so the book ends with sort of Stryker pulling a gun on Kitty, but then being taken out by a policeman, not killed, just he gets wounded and sort of taken out. And then the X-Men are just let go because again the police are just saying that they didn't do anything; they were just defending one of their own sort of thing, and they're sort of let go. I'm not entirely sure that would be the case because of the property damage they've caused, but we'll ignore that.
Yeah, my favorite part of the book though is his lieutenant. What happens to her? I mean, it's awful, but it's also, like, to me, the most gut punchy thing that happens.
Yes.
Yeah.
I should have skipped over that. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, like, she literally turns to Stryker and she's like, "This beams, this ray thing you got. I can feel it in my head. My ears are bleeding," and he turns on her.
Yeah.
And
pushes her off the front. Like, all right, off you go. But that also, again, shows how he's irredeemable. Like, that was, again, Claremont was giving us a chance to like Stryker, and he's like, fuck, nope.
Yeah.
It's gonna, yeah, so I love, it's horrific. But it's kind of one of those, is that what she deserved? I don't know, but that's the commentary that we have to ask ourselves. Is that what she deserved or not?
Yeah. Like I say, it ends with let's say the conversation and Magneto, and it's having. I mean, I see this in retrospect because to me, I sort of came up on later X-Men books and the X-Men cartoon, and so
the gateway drug, as I keep calling it. That's X-Men cartoon is the gateway drug for so many people to comic books.
That's it, and it's almost like that thing of like it's slightly less subtle in that sort of thing. So, so to see sort of Charles almost give up and see him sort of saying like maybe your way is the right way after all this is quite shocking. I mean, it's you are like reading it, you're like, no, you can't. You're the paragon of virtue in this. Like you're supposed to be that guiding light. And so, to have Scott then step up and be like, no, you started this as a dream, we've got to do it. But more than that, it doesn't end in conflict.
Right. Which I love. It works as a one-shot. And what I like about this and other like epic one-shots like The Killing Joke, it did affect continuity later. Like this was a one-off, but it was so important to the mythology of the characters that the events here matter later. This wasn't like God Loves Man Kills isn't X-Men 288 to 214, to 289. It's not that. It was just its own book. But then important, and it could have, had it done poorly and no one liked it, they could have easily just been like, this is out of the continuity. It's just
not in canon, doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. But because it was so important, it plays part, and the conversation between Charles and Magneto, which always is ongoing, changes a little here in the way that Magneto, this is the moment when Magneto becomes less of a villain and more of a hero. Like, there's a handful of villains who could carry their own title. And this is the time when, if you wanted to, right after this, give Magneto his own series, you could have.
Yeah. And I think, you say there's always been that thing. I think Claremont really made him what he is today. Like, the defining role of in that, and that conflict is sort of, because people always go back and say things like, oh, well, it's always been that sort of, Charles Xavier represents Martin Luther King, and Magneto is Malcolm X, and it's like, well, no, in the 60s, they weren't. In the 60s,
right.
They weren't.
They were not. That is all Claremont who did that. Yeah. It's easy to say that, and again, I think this is where Stan Lee gets all the credit he deserves. I'm not trying to, again, don't hate me and say I'm saying there's anything wrong with Stan Lee, but he's kind of like the ideas man, and he really did that. Like, he's like, here's some cool characters. He's a great character creator. Like, he's the guy who like starts the restaurant but couldn't manage it. That's how I feel about him. So he started this amazing idea, but it really wasn't until Claremont that X-Men became the X-Men that we know.
Yeah, no, agree. That he defined it for the future.
And by bringing in a more diverse cast. I mean, the original X-Men was, 4 white dudes and a woman. White woman, and one of them literally turned to ice. He was so white, and one was a blonde angel. He was so white, So it's like, okay. So Claremont was like, let's at least get an African woman. Let's get an American person. I mean, Forge didn't come in right away, but like he definitely said, hey, the world's a big place. There could only the mutants can't just be in the United States. Let's check into this. So I appreciate that, Peter, obviously, and being Russian, and that was a big deal too. At the height of the Cold War, Peter's character really mattered. So yeah, he definitely changed the entire way that we see the X-Men for the better.
No, I agree, and I think so. And this is a cornerstone of it, I think. Really.
Yeah, this book, and for sure. Yep.
So I mean, I would say, to round this out from my point of view, if you've seen the X-Men movies, and you want to read some, maybe not start here, but there are other entry points. But this is a key and important book that you really need to experience and read if you're going to be part of X-Men history. Yeah,
I think I would. If you've only seen the X-Men movies and you read this, you would recognize this. You would be like, oh, this is. I don't think it's the best place to start. I would actually, you'd want to go back to probably Giant 1 when Claremont takes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and that's not when I did that with Dave.
That's right. Yeah,
he brought that, and it stands up in many ways. I mean, some bits it suffers from it being a 70s comic in that, there's just a very different storytelling style, but it stands up in many other ways. But one final thing, though, I didn't know. I was just Googling this, and I was looking at how to read it, and luckily I've got that edition. But there's an extended cut of this released.
I saw that today. I didn't know that. I've never read the extended cut.
No, I don't know what's in it, and it came out relatively recently. So I'm not going to comment on it, but I was curious. I was a bit like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, but I think I want to go find it now. I didn't know until today.
Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting thing, but it wouldn't need it. It's one of those things that, like, if that's a theatrical version and there's an extended cut, the theatrical version is already very wordy, but it works perfectly well.
Well, maybe the extended cut is explains where Aurora was and why she and Scott sat out for most of it. I don't know. Or they were like, listen, Claremont, we can't just put an entire book out that has no pictures. It's just words. That's called a book. Just write a book if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
It's a comic book. We need some visuals, man.
Yes. Yeah. Just a prose book. You open up a floppy, you're like, oh, that's right. That's a lot of words. One small picture.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's your first book. I mean, so, you've recommended all of these, really.
Of course.
But what a way to start. One of the most important books, I'd say, in Marvel, in X-Men history, but also in Marvel.
Yeah, like I said, it's my favorite Marvel book. I think it's better than the Civil War. I think it's more important to the Marvel universe as being like literature, as being like, this is the real. We're not fucking around. That's this. Civil War is like the greatest superhero battle ever, but this isn't even a superhero story, which is what and the X-Men aren't superheroes.
Yeah,
they're reluctant. Few of them are like, man, I can't wait to go stop bad guys. They're like, fine. So that's no show up and
I agree. And it comes from an era, and I think it's again one of those things that when you look at this period, I mean, this came out in 1982. Final comment, and I think of the 80s, and everyone sort of says, "Oh, that's when the comics grew up," and they obviously comment on a lot of things, and people talk about, Saga of the Swamp Thing and Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen eventually, and those ones. And in Marvel you have like Frank Miller's Daredevil and this thing.
Oh,
but this, look, God Loves Man Kills, like 1982, like they were, this is dealing with some weighty issues in a really adult and sort of confrontational way. So this book should be talked about in that.
I totally agree.
Echelon.
Yeah.
Right, but let's jump to the other side. So we've talked Marvel.
Yeah.
Let's talk DC.
Yes.
And so you chose. I'll just. It's chapter 5 of A Lonely Place of Dying.
Yes, it's Batman 442.
442. The
From
first
1989. This came out in the height of the Bat craze. This Batman came out in June. This came out in November.
Yeah. So it's an interesting book. It's like you say, it's the fifth part of the first real sort of Batman crossover between Batman and the Teen Titans.
Yep.
And it's the first introduction of Tim Drake as Robin.
Yes.
And I say the issue is great. I really enjoyed the issue, but obviously I went back and read the whole thing.
So did I. Yeah.
I was not going to. But it's sort of another thing of opening up issues again, like this book and this issue itself starts to open up this idea of what the hell's Batman doing taking a child
right
into these conflicts.
I know.
And again, they do try and use some psychology to get around it. There's some real sort of psychological gymnastics to sort of say, no, Batman needs a Robin because it's what grounds him and stops him from going fully mental and killing people. Basically, is what it sort of comes down to.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me saying, I don't think adding a child is the answer. I'm thinking therapy.
And Alfred says that.
Yeah.
Not in this one, but in one of the earlier issues of this run, Alfred says, I think it's issue 1 of The Lonely Place of Dying. Alfred says to him, he's like, Master Bruce, maybe you need some help. And he's like, I'm just going to go punch things. And so, I'm
going to find some poor people to beat up.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, what I find interesting as well is sort of they've never been. They've always tried to do something with Robin. Like Robin's never been just it's a Dick Grayson replacement. I mean, even Jason Todd wasn't really that.
At first he was, and then they changed him to the Street Rat. Yeah.
They retconned him a little bit to be something different, but they really are sort of trying to set up Tim Drake as something different, aren't they? Sort of like he's proactive, he's intelligent. He's not coming from a broken place.
No, he's right. He's just a genius. He figures out by watching TV that Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson are Batman and Robin at age 9.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if that's in this one or if that's in the series. I think it's earlier when he says that, but it's Yeah, the reason that Tim Drake has always been my favorite Robin. Well, I was 16 when this came out. I owned it as a floppy. I sold it as part of my collection in college to pay my rent. But it was important to me. I'm obviously older than Tim, but Robin has always been my favorite character. And I spent the money to try to save Jason. I loved Dick Grayson. Obviously, I was a big Teen Titans reader. I liked him as Robin. I liked him as Nightwing. But the thing about when you're a book nerd who wants to read things beyond just comic books, who reads and like thinks about stuff and thinks staying at home and studying is fun, Tim Drake's your guy. And so Tim Drake was my guy. I just like, I loved everything. I mean, he was younger than me. He was 3 years younger than me, but he wanted to be Robin, and I wanted to be Robin. So he's the only Robin who didn't shoot, well, besides Carrie Kelly, he's the only Robin who like doesn't feel forced into it. He does it because he thinks it's the right thing to do and because he's a good guy. And he's not broken. Throughout all of his life, Tim Drake's life, all of the retcons and the New 52 and Rebirth, this has always stuck with his origin. Right? Tim Drake has always been the smart kid who figured it out. So the reason that this issue, I picked this one is because while he looks exactly like Jason and Dick, he's still a white kid with black hair. And he's even puts on Jason's suit in this. His personality, even Two-Face makes the comment about where's the quips, boy, or whatever. So you're I just love it. I loved everything about it. And again, on its face, you're like, really? Like you said, there's some real issues at play there. But I think that also is important too, is that this is really the first big dive into Batman's mental state, which up until this point, no one ever said, why do you keep selecting children as you're weird? What is happening? So that's my rant. Sorry.
No, it's good. I agree. I mean, one of the things is when it's earlier than this, and I think it's when he explains it to Dick Grayson about how he's figured it out, and he's sort of like, well, it turns out he was there when it happened. I mean, that's one of the things. He saw the Flying Graysons fall. Right.
He was at
and then and then he's sort of like, and then all of a sudden, like, I saw Batman. He comes down, and he sort of like, at first I thought it was this thing of fear. And but then 6 months later, you've got Robin. Yeah. And I saw this gymnastic kid that was doing all this sort of stuff, and weird. And then more off recently, sort of Nightwing appears, and then Robin disappears, which is obvious. And then all of a sudden, we know that Bruce Wayne takes on Jason Todd as his ward, and then a new Robin appears again. He's like, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's not that hard to figure out, is it really? It's not. Oh, if a 9-year-old's figure this out, I'm pretty sure someone at a social services is going, do you know?
Wait a minute.
You know this Mr. Wayne? He runs through kids pretty quick, doesn't he?
Yeah, right. He does. Yeah, and the thing is, Marv actually wrote around that. Yeah. That Jason finds his real mother, right? And so that's why Jason dies, is he dies being reunited with his birth mother. So they don't even they get around that, because Jason, it's not Bruce's fault that Jason died. It's Jason's fault that Jason died. And so
if I remember rightly, he tells him to leave it alone, doesn't he? And sort of,
he does. Yeah.
I mean, the thing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But no, I say like this. You do see there's a confrontation. But one of the things I find interesting in this is Robin's always been shown as, like I say, especially the Dick Grayson one. Like I say, the quips and the flips and all that sort of stuff. But when Tim fights Two-Face in this issue, he only just survives because Alfred saves him. Yeah. It's sort of which again would raise red flags all over the place. Of like, what's this old dude sort of running in to save this kid? But I do like the fact that he's not ready.
He's not at all.
He doesn't just jump in and all of a sudden he's taking out villains left and right. Like, no, this could have ended in a very different way.
Even this scene, and what I loved about it in that moment, and I remember reading this, and Two-Face has it looks like the crowbar that killed Jason.
It does.
Exact same thing. And the thing is, the artist of this, so the Lonely Place of Dying, George Perez does the Titans ones, and Jim Aparo does this. And I know he's not the best Batman artist. I know that's Jim Lee, but he's still my favorite Batman artist. And because he does that, like, kind of like the perspective of the adults are huge.
Yes.
Tim's standing next to them. Tim's 13. He's not like he's 8, but he's really small. And Jim Aparo is Batman and Two-Face, and his Joker's face is like 6 feet long, right? And he's always long and lean. So there's this perspective of the crowbar, and it's almost the exact same shot of Joker killing Jason. And I honestly can remember 1989 being like, you're gonna do this. It's called The Lonely Place of Dying.
Yeah.
You know, you're setting me up. You show him on the cover. The cover of this issue is Robin in front of the bat symbol. And now you're going to kill him too? Oh, and you're not even going to give me a chance to vote? I was but then, yeah, Alfred saves the day. And it's, again, a moment for us to love and respect and be happy Alfred exists. But also, it was just such a nice callback to the previous thing. It's just such a tight issue. And again, if this is the one I'm taking on the island, I know the previous 4 I kind of needed to read, but there's enough in this one that if you just got this one, it starts with him holding an empty Robin suit saying, well, maybe Batman needs Robin. And you can think about it, like you said, the psychological aspects of this. Two-Face's psychology, Joker's role in it, Bruce and Dick's relationship, Bruce and Alfred's relationship, and then this new kid. There's so much that if you only read this Batman comic, you could spend alone on your desert island years thinking about and coming up with scenarios about what will happen next.
Yeah.
It's an ending, but it's really the beginning of the new chapter of the Bat world. And this book is that one. And so to me, that's why I picked it, because I thought, well,
that's a really good point. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's like a turning of the corner, isn't it? It's sort of like, you know, it's weird. It's almost like them writing themselves out of a corner a bit as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, like, oh, we're going down this dark place with Batman. I think we need to address that in some way. And they do it well. But like you say, it's not neat. And that's what I quite like about this, is it's like, it's not sort of like, and now he has a new Robin and off he goes. There's this whole thing, like, even at the end of it, like the sort of like the epilogue is they're back at the manor, and he's sort of like, well, what are we going to do with you? Because you now know pretty much everything. And he says, look, I'm going to take you on, like, you're going to train, you're going to do this, you're going to understand, and, you know, and he's like, yeah, I'll earn your trust, I'll do it. And it's not just right, let's go on and fight crime, chum.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like the fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I love it. It's real. This is, again, this is for a man putting on a bat costume. George Bush is the president in this universe.
Yeah.
He's mentioned in there. So this is, and I don't know that it's in this one, or if it's in this series, like, Two-Face is talking about blowing up the Twin Towers.
Oof, yeah.
And it's like, holy shit. I mean, it's crazy how rooted in reality this book is. And it does just that. It makes it, Batman's it's still a dark comic, of course, but Jim Aparo's Batman is the least dark of all of, you know, I mean, notwithstanding the early stuff, but in the modern era, it's the least. He drew Batman, not detective, right? So there's a reason for that, because Batman is always the lighter comic to detective comics.
The more action focused one, and that's
yeah. And I mean, in general, I like detective comics better than Batman comics, but this is because this one is the action is. I mean, there's a lot of action. There's a lot of standing around and Bruce yelling at Dick. Yeah. There's not a lot that happens here. So I agree. It's like you said, I think that's right. Exactly what you said. You turned a corner here. And if this is the only Batman comic you ever read, you learn everything you need to know. I mean, imagine if this is the first Batman comic you ever read, you learn everything you need to know about Batman for the next 30 years. Until Damian, these are the 4 people you need to know.
Yeah. No, it's it, and it's such a I mean, this whole book's well established, and it sort of picks up, it ties up threads and starts new threads so well. It's a transition book. It really is a transition book. I mean, you know, I know we're focused on this issue, but within the book, like, you know, within the Teen Titans section, or just the Titans section, sorry, you know, Dick goes back and visits Haley's circus, and you've got a whole story there. Which sets him up as being, you know, like dealing with his past, but then re-establishing him as part of the future. You then get sort of more stuff to do with Batman sort of having to deal with Jason's death. And like you say, this idea of him being injured and just walking into injury, like almost like, I love there's a great conversation at the beginning where he's like, you used to think with your head. But Alfred says it to him. You used to think with your head. Now you think with your fists. And it plays out throughout all of it. Like, it comes back to that final issue where there is a moment where he's looking at his hands. He's like, I could deck this guy, or you know, he catches like Two-Face's coin, doesn't he? And sort of, he's like, it's over. Like, you're done for. Like, you know, he does knock him down, but it's not like a drawn out battle. He's
he doesn't like kick him.
Yeah, it's just like, I'm just done. And so it's sort of, it's a nice way of drawing to an end this sort of like the grief period for Jason Todd. And then, you know, it obviously takes it into the future. So no, it's such a well done book. I mean, it's weirdly, everyone talks of, you know, everyone talks of like a death in the family, you know, sort of thing, and it's obviously up there. But A Lonely Place of Dying, sort of, if you know Tim, you'd talk about it, but other than that, it doesn't probably get the attention it probably deserves in the wider sort of Batman ethos.
Right, and it actually, for those of us who voted to save Jason, Tim Drake is my favorite Robin. So you have to, like, if my wishes had been fulfilled, I never get Tim Drake.
That's true, and it was very close, wasn't it? It was a couple of a couple of tens.
Yeah, and Steve mentioned that it was actually rigged. Like, some guy set up an auto, you know, this is early days, but he figured out a way to have a number just to keep auto calling to kill Jason.
Wow.
Yeah.
They really didn't want him around.
It's crazy. I mean, how much, and they were 50 cents a call too. So it wasn't like that was free at the time. But for me, so it was a healing process for me, for fans too, for those of us who liked Jason and tried to save Jason. You've given us somebody different, and somebody that who arguably, it's up for debate, this is a different show, is the best Robin.
Yeah.
He's not the best hero, but he's the best Robin.
Yes.
And if anyone should take over Batman, it's Tim Drake. Because he's not, Dick's too fun, Jason's too violent. We already saw what happened when Azrael took over. So we know that the only person who can match Bruce mentally, who may actually in some things be smarter than Bruce, is Tim Drake. So I've always felt like, you know, he's been the one. This just changed the future of the DC universe. Honestly, this one, because Tim Drake's place in it, as far as like, you know, the Shuri of the DC universe is kind of, you know, that's the best comparison. Like, Tim Drake and Shuri shares a lot of the same. I was going to say, because Tim sort of, I'm thinking about, you know, his place. I mean, one of the weird things is you say about this being a transition book, it sort of, it deals with the grief and I think sort of a period, because before this you've had Death of the Family, and you had, you know, you've had things like Dark Knight Returns and that sort of thing. So it's been quite a dark sort of period for Batman. I think even before this, you've had sort of the Demon, Son of the Demon, and all that kind of stuff. And so you think, like, not that it's going to go into a lighter period, but it feels like a more positive. The end of this feels like a more positive ending. I mean, the final panel is a reveal as well, like who's been manipulating Two-Face into doing it. And you get a great little reveal that it's the Joker, which again done very, very nicely, not overplayed. But you could be like, oh yeah, that's a fun little thing, but you've got a positive future, not knowing you've got like Nightfall. Yeah, I know.
All these catastrophes.
Yeah, all these other long. Yeah, there's lots of other shit that comes.
Yeah.
Hush hasn't happened yet. Hush is, of course, way later, and that's when Jason comes back. So, but that's all of that. All of this has to happen to get to all of that. So yeah, it is. It just, to me, and because Batman is really the center of the DC universe now. Everybody it's not Superman. We all know that. So it, and notwithstanding, it's again a longer conversation, but I'm not super thrilled with Tim Drake's new name, Drake. Like, how is the smartest guy in the DC universe name? His new superhero name is just his last name.
Yeah, didn't work at it. It's like, what's this? What do you call this new team? Well, we've got Wayne, Grayson, and Drake. Yeah, I don't know. They've got a real problem with names at the moment because they've obviously got a bit of a problem with Dick Grayson. Because I didn't read the whole thing, but I know he had a gunshot wound to the head.
And now he's Rick Grayson. It's terrible.
Rick Grayson.
I hate that. It's awful. I hate that whole run. It's really disappointing. Yeah, it looks like it's coming to an end with Joker War. So, and actually, DC Comics in general. My problem with DC Comics in general is I've got crossover fatigue. And the thing that I like about this book is with 2 series crossover, it does change the way that the DC universe happens, but it's not like there's not an add-in to find out what does Superman think of Tim Drake. Who gives a shit? We don't care. Yeah. What does Green Arrow think about Tim Drake? We don't care. Eventually, Tim will meet him. It'll be fine. We'll move on. But it wasn't like everything in DC now is so epic and so crossover-y that it's exhausting. This was kind of unfortunately, while it changed, it also is the beginning. Well, this was successful. What else can we cross over?
Yeah. Well, I think it seems, it starts a trend that grows. And you end up with things like Nightfall and the growth to everything that sort of happens after that. I have to admit, though, like DC at the moment, I'm reading a lot of the smaller titles and stuff, but I'm not reading Batman or anything like that. But like you say, I just don't know. Like I read the first issue of Death Metal, DC's.
I didn't like it.
Metal. No, I read Metal before, and I was like, yeah, but it's sort of like so ludicrous and so big and so bombastic that I'm a bit like I just lose complete engagement with them now.
Yeah, I don't care. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Right, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's go. Because I was looking, I was like, I've got 20 minutes, so I was going to tell you.
Let's do it then. 20 minutes. Final issue, because I've been loving this. So the
me
final
too. I could go for 2 hours, but
comes out in 1993, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's well, you explain Death. It's in who she is really, because it's there's a bit of backstory to this.
Yeah, so Death, this is number 1. She had a 3-shot miniseries, Death, The High Cost of Living, Neil Gaiman, of course, who created her, and Backlow as the artist.
Yes.
And it's not it's probably my favorite Death artist, probably because of this. There's, and that's all, probably just because I like this book so much. But there's other people who've done. I don't know that there's ever been a bad drawing of Death. Let me just say that. So anyway, so Death is Sandman's sister, the Endless. I almost picked Endless Nights, but that would have been cheating. That was way too long. Which is so Dream is one of the 7 Endless, and Death is his older sister. She's second, right? It's Destiny, Death, Dream. Yeah, so they're the oldest 3 of the siblings. And she is the perkiest, happiest version of Death ever. And she even says in this book, she's like, why be scary and creepy when you could just be pleasant? And so she is she is drawn to be like a goth teenage girl. And she could look like whatever you want her to look like. The cool thing about the Endless is depending on who sees them, they look like, so it's really meta that the Endless look the way they look because that's how Neil sees them. For us, they were reflective of Neil, pale British guy. So they are all pale British people. But if someone else sees them, they look different, and that's addressed in the Sandman series. But in this version, she just looks like the way that she looks. Was a pasty white girl who wears an ankh and is genuinely pleasant. And I picked this one over The Sound of Her Wings, which is her real kind of first appearance in the Sandman series, which I think is Sandman 8, because this is just her story. She talks to her siblings. but in that she's a side character, and this is her first time to shine. She doesn't get a lot of it, but I feel like she's probably everybody's favorite Endless. She's my favorite Endless. And this is a book where everything happens and nothing happens, and it's excellent storytelling. The characterization is solid. And again, if I'm on my desert island, I have a lot of words to read.
Yeah. Well, this book to me and is almost like quintessential Neil Gaiman.
Yeah.
In that way that, like you say, it's everything and nothing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like there's so
Especially
much
the way
going on.
this one ends. This is part of a three-part miniseries, which nobody does it. Who does a three-part miniseries anymore? But Neil Gaiman can do whatever he wants. And this entire first part is just setup. Miniseries now, and I've been reading some Boom Studios miniseries in the Buffyverse. The first book, they know going in this is going to be a trade. I'm writing the first book. Most people are going to read this as chapter 1, not over 6 months. Where Neil knew you had to wait a month between these, and he was going to get you somewhere and then make you go, God damn it, I have to wait a month? You know, that's what I think is genius about it, too.
Well, it is. It is totally that. I mean, it takes you to a point where, like, you want to just keep going. Like, that's the thing. And that's the thing about Gaiman's writing, I think. It's just, whether it be his books or his comics, like, he has such a way of I can't remember, I read it somewhere, but like basically, like he gets you into like the flow. Like it's like stepping into a river and just going with it, and it's almost like you get just taken along with it. And I just love that how he does that. In all of his works, really. But one of the things is he's not scared to challenge you. Like this book starts with a 16-year-old, I think it's 15 or 16-year-old
16
boy.
and a half, he says. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He said 16 and a half. Writing what he said isn't his suicide note, but a statement of his feelings. And it's this sort of notion of like, he's clearly got something, every teenager goes through a period of apathy and all this other stuff. But he's like, I don't care. I don't want anything. I don't need anything. I don't feel anything. And you do sort of go like, I feel really sorry for this kid. Like,
Calls parents by their first names and they don't seem to mind.
Yeah, no one addresses it. The fact that his father's like some Hollywood schmutzy lawyer who sort of like, he's like, yeah, that's what he does. He's a slime ball, and I recognise that he is that. And the way my mum deals with it is that she goes to these fads of like, she had a Freudian fortnight, and now she went through a hippie fortnight and this other stuff. I'm like, it's no wonder you've reached this point. But it never gets away from this thing of like, you're still a teenager. Like, if you had someone in your life that would give you guidance, you'd probably be, oh, wait, here you go, here comes death.
Yeah.
And that's it. And it's sort of like, all right. And it's just sort of the way he engages you in that. It's so well done.
Yeah, death doesn't tell this story.
No.
Right. She's not the narrator. Sexton is. And it's so smart. She doesn't show up for like page 7 or 8 of her own first issue of her own first miniseries. Death is not until page 7. She's not the story. The plot is that every 100 years, Death has to live 24 hours and then die, so that she knows what it's like. And so in this first issue, she's really genuinely pleased, even though she knows how her day is going to end. She's just thrilled, and she shows up in a garbage dump, which I find interesting. Like that's where she arrives. And that's where Sexton is. A refrigerator falls on him. And like that's the only real action. The action scene in this book is a refrigerator falling on a downtrodden 16-year-old boy. Yeah.
Well, again, but that moment of fate, that moment of sort of incident, it's a shifting moment for both character and story, because up until this point, he's like, I've written my suicide note. I clearly want to die. And then when he is confronted with the potential of death, both physically as herself, also as this moment of like, if I die, I could die here. He's like, he starts screaming for help. Like he is looking for help. And it's almost like then you sort of like, he's like, oh no, actually, I'm not sure. And of course it is then death that appears. And I like the fact she calls him on his shit as well.
Oh, she's awesome.
Like, she's like, what are you doing down there? He's like, an accident. He's like, why are you here? Like, in a dump. Like, what are you doing?
And then he's
Yeah.
like, he tries to give her snark. She's like, all right, see ya. And he's like, no, shit, sorry, no, can't be he grows up. It's only one day, but his life is better when this series is over. Because the whole thing only takes place in 24 hours. And in that moment, right, is she just continues to and the best thing about it, she never lies once. She's one of those people. The thing that I love about Death is she's always telling you the truth. Always. There's never been one appearance of Death where she's ever lied. She doesn't ever do it. It's whether or not you're paying attention to what she's actually saying. She's always telling you what the answer is, but you have to shut the fuck up and listen to her. And this whole book is Sexton. And again, I was older. I was 20 when this came out, but I could still like understand, you're kind of lost. College, I'm a junior in college. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing. What's happening. And here's this kid who's like, I don't know what the hell's happening. You could really relate to him. You didn't have to just be 16. You could be in your 40s. You could be 15. It wouldn't matter because he's so fully developed because of because he writes this kind of manifesto, and the whole story is his manifesto to us. We've all been there. We've all been like, I'm just gonna write down, and then this, and it's not like it's not a romantic comedy. There's no spark between them. But it's like the right person comes into your life at the right time to send you in the right direction. It just so happens that it's Death when you're thinking about Death.
You say the thing, because that would be the thing. That would be almost like the cliche, the sexual spark between.
Oh yeah.
But that even gets addressed straight away because she goes back and he's obviously ripped all his jeans and she's like, look, take them off and I'll sew them. And he's like, oh right, and he thinks he's in there a little bit. And she's like, look, I'm not saying you're not cute, but no. Yeah. That's not what this is about.
Yeah,
forget
just
that.
Just gonna fix your pants, right?
Yeah. And like I said, that's what they did. Like I say, they just all that goes out the window. And one of the other key characters in all this, again, so that drives the story, is a character of Mad Hetty,
who's a Hellblazer character. Delano invented.
Yes,
but she lives way more in the Sandman universe.
Yeah, well, I think that's just the Vertigo thing, wasn't it? These characters are sort of they mixed and merged and stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, because John Constantine comes from obviously Swamp Thing, and then it obviously all moved along.
Right. Yeah.
But I like the fact that, like, again, she's one that sort of like she's not messing around. Like, and again, she doesn't ever sort of. She has a confrontation where she's asked a bunch of sort of like street punk girls to get her a dove.
Yeah.
And she says to them, like, oh, here's your $5. And they're like, we spent all day doing this. And she's like, well, I don't give a shit. You told me, I told you I want a dove. You said £5. There you go.
Yeah.
And again, like, she's up front. And because they threatened something, like, if you've got £5, we think you've got more. So they tried to mug her. And she says to them, like, don't do that. Don't. And she gives them the opportunity. It's like you said with Death. Like, at no point does Hetty lie. She
Ever. Yeah, he never lies. I know.
And she doesn't. She never manipulates anyone. She's so upfront. I just want that. Just leave me alone, and you'll be fine. No, and she ends up breaking one's leg, or she snaps a twig, and it breaks the.
Yeah.
And it's just these little moments. And again, she's not looking for confrontation. She's like, all of this could have been avoided. And I'm walking away now. And I find her, like, just in this first issue, like, a really interesting character. Like, she just wants her heart back. I've looked for it. I'll keep looking. I want my heart. Like, that's what.
Yeah, and that's. Yeah, because she's hidden her heart from Death. That's her story. She's 250, and there's a handful of characters in the Sandman universe. Hob, who gets to live on. Death kind of passes them over, and Hetty's one of those characters. Death and she have kind of come to some sort of an agreement where she's going to leave her be. And I love Hetty too, yeah, for lots of reasons. She's actually in the new, which unfortunately is ending, I'm very sad, Tim Hunter's Books of Magic. She's back in that, and she just sits around with her pigeons and tells the truth, and everybody's, because she's called Mad Hetty. That's the best part, is Sexton spends this whole book thinking Death, who's called Dee Dee, is crazy. And she's like, just, if you shut the fuck up and listen to me. And there's such a commentary there about the two, and this is a female, Sexton's telling the story, but he's surrounded by women. And I think it's really smart. It's really beautifully done. Like, the downstairs neighbor is a woman who looks like Madame, or is it, I can never say her last name, from House of Whispers. I never say her last name right, but you know who I'm talking about. She looks like her. And when I first saw it, I was like, hey, but it's not her. But maybe it is. But so he's got that woman, his mother, the lesbian couple that used to work for his mother, Death, Hetty. He's surrounded by these women, and it's really like, again, Neil knew who his audience was. He's like, there's a lot of teenage boys who are picking up Death thinking, ooh, I'm in love with Death. Death isn't interested, first of all. Not all women are interested in you. Shut up and listen to them. And so the message is very clear that Neil is writing, whether it's to his own 16-year-old self or to the teenage boys who would be dating his then teenage daughters. Listen, shut up and listen every once in a while. They're not interested in your stupid shit. So I just love it. I just love the advice that he's giving his audience because, of course, women read comics, of course, and even in the 90s, women were reading less so than now. But he knew exactly what he was saying. And I actually think Neil Gaiman brought more women into comics.
Yeah, 100%. No doubt about that.
Yeah, and I think because of Death. I think Death was like you said, the X-Men comic was the gateway, or X-Men cartoon in the 90s. But I also think Death in the 90s brought a lot of women into comics. I'm thrilled about that, and I think this is kind of a love letter to women too, women and girls. Like
I agree. I think you're spot on with that. I think it is. I mean, one of the things Neil Gaiman, it's he again is he's all about his words. He's all about telling the story, and there's no over-sexualization. There's no degrading in any way. It's like, no, they're just people. Some of them are nice, some of them are not. So it's like, even those the sort of, like I said, the punk girls that sort of take on Hetty, like, they're not, even Hetty sort of acknowledges, like, look, I know you.
She says their names. Yeah, they are. Yeah, she
has that power. Like, it's this thing of like, they're just there because that's just the path they're on. Like, they're not bad. They just, and she sort of says, look, please don't go down this path. I know it's just interesting to see that. Like, at no point is it anyone like, yeah, you're bad for doing this. It's just, no, that's just who you are. That's just the path you're on at the moment. And I find that Gaiman does that a lot. That's one of his things. Is like there are very few definitively good and definitively bad people in Gaiman works. It's always, at this moment in time, I'm in this position, which puts me this side or that side of the line, and it could change, at some point. And I think that's, he likes to do that, and I think that's why I enjoy a lot of what he writes. And it's, this book's just, it's almost like, I wouldn't say poetry is a bit much, but he has that flow that feels very poetic, and I think that's why sort of you can sink into those books and you can enjoy these characters, and you get 30. I mean, they're all 30. I think this was 44 pages, or maybe more than that. I don't know, about 40 odd pages.
It's probably 40, which is long for a standalone book, but it was worth it. It's worth it.
You sort of get to that, you get to the end, and I'm like, oh shit, I've read that fast. Like,
right. I know, but you read, but there's a lot to read. And again, that's the thing, as I was thinking about what to pick, I almost picked the third one of this. But if I'm stuck on an island, I picked one that begins and ends, but also gives me a lot to think about with the X-Men. But with this one, with Death, it ends, and she has a quest. So if I never read the next two, I get to, he's given me enough information. He's given me my three main characters. He's given me the villain. There's a villain in there. And so I can decide what happens. I would not necessarily, so I like stories, and that's what I love about comics is you get to the end of a run, and in general, there's always going to be more coming. And there's always a tease of what could happen next, kind of like the after credits epilogue type thing. And so to me, picking the first one in this miniseries, and as opposed to The Sound of Her Wings, is because this gives, if I'm alone on a desert island, I took the assignment seriously. I'm like, what do I want to do with my time? Well, I want to think about what's happening next. So this gives me the opportunity to tell my own story. He's given me a world. We never find out how, Hetty's from London. We never find out how she gets to New York. And Death says, I think in issue 2, she's like, I wonder how Hetty got here. She must have stowed away. That's too bad. She gets seasick. And it's like, that's it. That's the only explanation that you get. And you don't see how she gets back to London. We know that she eventually does because she shows up in other things. we know that she knows John Constantine's mom, Joanna, or grandma, Joanna. Like, Hetty's been around. So we know she travels the world. And so it's just like a smart, again, excellent writing in issue 2 where she's like, oh, I wonder how she got here. But in this one, we don't know. So I wonder that, rereading it, I'm like, how did Hetty get here? They must address it later. And then they don't really. So this, if I have to spend some time with the book, in addition to it just being thoughtful and beautiful, it also gives me something to think about for hours and hours on end.
No, I agree. It could be endless debate.
Endless, pun.
Yeah. Didn't even realize I do that, but I'm taking credit for it.
Yeah, excellent. Edit right around it. Yeah, pun. That's right.
But I have to say, I read issue 1 last night of this, and I've downloaded the other 2, so I'm going to be finishing it out because it's great. I love the Sandman world. I love I like the fact it's come back. They've done some good stuff with it. I haven't read all of it.
It's not all good. House of Whispers is terrible. Books of Magic is beautiful, and unfortunately, it's ending in two weeks. Kat Howard, the fantasy novelist, did the first 18 issues. It's really spectacular, and it reminds you that J.K. Rowling needs to send Neil Gaiman a check.
Oh, well, that's come up recently, hasn't it? I saw it on social media. People were a bit like, they were sort of saying about Harry Potter, and someone came up and was like, has anyone else read Books of Magic? Because, you got to know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying the new Hellblazer as well.
Yeah.
That's been really good.
Yeah, he showed up. They tied John in to some of the Books of Magic and the Dreaming stuff just to get him set up for his new series, and it didn't work. Like they really squeezing him in. You don't need to promo Constantine. Just do a new Hellblazer. People are gonna buy it. It's fine. So anyway, but yes, I'm sorry. We're at the end of
that's fine. Yeah. Tell you what, Tony, this has been great. I really enjoyed it.
I know. I could have talked for more.
Yes, no, we could, and we will. We'll be back. I'll have you on for something else. We'll definitely do it again.
Excellent.
But thank you very much. And yes, we will do it again sometime soon. That'd be great.
I appreciate it. All right.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was a fantastic episode. I thoroughly enjoyed having Tony on the show, and what 3 great issues Tony chose. Great conversation, great discussion. So I hope you enjoyed that, and we will be doing some more Desert Island comics in the future. So, let us know who you think I should be getting on. Do you want to come on? I'm open to anybody coming on, and let's discuss some comics. But for the rest of the future, more episodes coming for the rest of the year. But if you like the show, get in contact. You can find us on Twitter at 20th Century Geek. You can email me, 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. I have a website. Go check it out, 20thcenturygeek.com. All these different things. But more than that, we have a Patreon now. If you really enjoy the show. And our sister show, Stories Out of Time and Space, the sci-fi movie review podcast. Come and find us on Patreon and support the show. We have many, many tiers. At the bottom tier, you will get a monthly podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts. The next one up, you get to choose the topic for 30-Minute Talk. You get to vote in a poll for the topic for 30-Minute Thoughts every month. And in the top tier, not only do you get the podcast, not only do you get to choose the 30-Minute Thoughts, you also get to help vote on a show once a quarter for the mainstream. That's right, so 4 shows a year, you will get to choose what it is we do. And we really appreciate that kind of support and that dedication. So if you want to support the show, come over and see what we've got to offer. Other ways you can support the show: go onto your iPod, go onto your podcast catcher and leave a review, whether it be 1 star, 5 stars, I don't care. Leave an honest review and let us know what you think about the show. I'd really appreciate it. It sends us up the charts and all that kind of good stuff. Other than that, I hope you enjoy it and have a good time. Stay safe, and I'll see you again soon.